Welcome to Cash Plays. And now your host, Bart Hanson.
Welcome, everyone, to another week of Cash Plays. I am Bart Hanson. This week's episode, Samoleus 2. Of course, you can email the show at cashplays@pokerroad.com. Send me a Skype over at bart.hanson on Skype. And check out the Poker Road forums, pokerroad.com/forums. We've got a great little Cash Plays forum going over there. And I'm going to use a bunch of questions for Samoleus that people posted up on the forums throughout this week. Neiman Kencray, Neiman, I really appreciate you coming back on the show. You know, first of all, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fine, thanks, Bart, and I'm glad to be back. I had a lot of fun with it the first time, and looking forward to tonight.
Well, you know, we did an interview back in the spring at the end of March at Foxwoods, which was almost 7 months ago. And, you know, a lot's happened since then. We had the summertime World Series of Poker, all that stuff. Now, of course, people that might not be familiar with you only go down and play live a couple times a year during the WPTs at Foxwoods, and then most of the other times you are at home playing online. And if anyone hasn't had a chance to listen to the first conversation with Samoleus, it's the April 1st episode, and I want to encourage everybody to go back over there. Neiman, I have a handful of strategy questions and then just kind of, general questions. So I'm just kind of going to bounce back and forth. And, you did such a great job articulating last time. We're gonna hop right into it. The first question I have for you, and it's not really a strategy question, but it's kind of a state of the game question, is have you seen any type of change in the game since we talked last over the last 7 months? And what exactly have you been up to? Because there's been a little bit of discussion that have you not been playing as much? Have you cut it down a little bit? Let's just talk about what you've been doing and how the games have changed over the last 6-7 months.
Yeah, sure. That's actually a great topic because it's been something that's sort of been on my mind for a bit, and I'll be happy to let you know what I've been up to as well. I think that the game has in fact changed quite dramatically, and this is actually something that I can touch on now, but I would actually like to talk more over the course of the interview because it is a very important thing, and it's a very important shifting of the landscape in online poker, and especially in No Limit Hold'em. I think what has happened in today's game is actually very unfortunate for the better players. And what that is the something's been happening that reduces the gap between the better players and the weaker players. And what that is the nature of the game, the way it's played today at limits of, pretty much anything that I see. I train some students at lower limits, and I've played, anywhere from 510 up to 2550, and you see it pretty unilaterally, and that is that the game is being played. Now, I'm referring specifically to the 100 big blind online game. It's being played with so much aggression, and people are re-raising and 3-betting and 4-betting with all kinds of hands like suited connectors and things like that, rather than seeing flops. Now, what does that mean? How does that affect the players, and why am I saying that this is a detriment to the better players? Well, what it does is it reduces the complexity of the decision-making process. And in doing so, the game, which is a 100 big blind game, is effectively plays like a 50 big blind game or a 30 big blind game because so many of the pots are re-raised pre-flop, and so basically when all the money goes in, it's a top pair or an overpair versus a draw, and it's sort of a no one's ever making a big mistake by putting their money in after the flop, and so you're not able to have a huge edge over players that know what they're doing. Now, obviously, this goes hand in hand with the fact that players simply overall have a better idea. There's been a lot of analysis and a lot of training in No Limit Hold'em, and people understand what's going on. But the extreme aggression with which the game is played, especially on earlier streets, and again, in particular, pre-flop, has it's really reduced it's made it more of a gambling game and reduced the edge between the good players and the bad players. And for me, I find that very disappointing because it seems to me that the very good players that would have massive edges over the weaker players, many of them, they don't seem to understand. I mean, like if someone raises and you have a hand like King Jack suited on the button, or 8-7 suited, that's not a re-raising hand. That's a hand that plays so much better when you have more of a stack to pot ratio. And that's a key term and a key concept here is stack to pot ratio. Again, I know I'm rambling on.
No, that's cool, and I actually want to touch on that a little bit because that was actually going to be my first strategy question for you. Because back in the original interview, you talked about how like a Card Runners and some of the other training sites really, really preach like a pre-flop aggression, and of course you talked about how well like a 7-8 suited plays so well as a call in position, stack size to pot size ratio. My question to you now though is that, how can you profitably call with those hands when aggressive players in the blinds have such a tendency to 3-bet squeeze so light these days?
Yeah, and that's a very good question. And in fact, the answer is that the profitability of those hands has decreased quite a bit. And what's happened now to the game is that the whole specter of the game has changed such that it's easier, it's simpler to play. And that's not a good thing, because it makes it so that the masses can play almost as well as the great players, and so the edge there is less. I mean, my own results are a starting point for me. I'm still doing pretty well, but not nearly as well as I have in previous years. And I don't really think that is indicative of anything that I'm doing wrong or differently. It's just that the nature of the game now becomes where it's not as profitable, as you said, to take speculative hands in further, because you're going to be, you call a raise with them or you open raise with them. Half the time you're going to face a re-raise, and now you're already got, a fifth of your stack in or more than that pre-flop with those hands. And with like suited connectors and stuff, you never flop the full, or you rarely flop the full hand. You'll flop like a pair and a flush draw, or a straight draw and a flush draw, or something like that is the kind of flop you like for that hand. But now with the pot already bloated pre-flop and people firing away on a continuation bet, you can't, if you decide to play, you have to put your stack in, and now you're racing against someone with an overpair, so on. It's really it's not as profitable, if at all, as it used to be, and so basically a way to be successful is to really just play, go back to the basics the way Hold'em was played many years ago. That being, where you're just looking at your top hands, like your big pairs and your ace kings, and then you take them and you just blast them away and play hard at them. It seems like that would be one way of being profitable, and then another. And then certainly the way that the players, you referred to the card runner style, that we had talked about in our first interview. I know that they teach this rampant aggression and this 3-betting with suited connectors and stuff that I really think is such a flawed technique. Now with everybody else doing that, you can still do that, and if you select your hands with a frequency and a hand strength that's optimal, you're still going to make money in the game. But it's not at all like it was before, where you could force your opponents to have to make thinking logical decisions, to have to put them in tough spots, to put them in a situation where there's several layers of decision making. I mean, at this point, it's the decisions are so simple. I mean, you re-raise pre-flop with your whole range of hands, and then if you have top pair, you can play for 100 big blinds the way the game is playing today. And so again, the unfortunate thing about that is that it's greatly reduced the gap between the best players and the average players.
Yeah, and it's almost like it's playing almost like a sit and go with non-escalating blinds, if you follow. What I mean by that.
Yeah, that's perfectly put, Bart. That's exactly That's exactly how it's. That's really well said. That's exactly that. That would be a great encapsulation of the state of the game today. And it's really disappointing to me because there's some very, very intelligent players out there that if they didn't succumb to this style that everybody else is doing, they would be making a lot more money than what they are making. But I can think of several of my daily opponents that are very good thinking, extremely intelligent players, but in my opinion, the whole philosophy, the approach of this is completely wrong, and they are, by playing the way they do, they slash their own win rates tremendously, and in doing so, they, it affects me and others like me, the few of us that aren't blasting away at the pots and are trying to keep the stack to pot ratio small. In fact, I can sort of explain what I'm saying here by giving a sort of an exaggerated example.
Go ahead.
Supposing you were to take an absolute beginner in poker, just basically somebody with a decent head on their shoulders, explain the rules, and had them play for 10 minutes. Now, if they were playing against a top pro, and they were playing, and let's say you were playing with stacks of only 5 big blinds, there's really no edge, really. Maybe the top pro would have a slightly bigger edge. You know what I mean? But really, it's going to be who picked up the right hand at the right time and put the money. It's so, lucky. On the other hand, let's suppose you also did that. You had the same situation, but you're playing with 1,000 big blinds, and you've got, your beginning player versus your top pro. The beginning player will never win ever. You know what I mean? Because there's just, when you're playing that deep, the better player can control the pots, can make decisions, can basically use his wealth of knowledge that he has over the weaker player in a way to exploit him, and simply it's the game becomes more complex, and when it's played, and this is a perfect exemplification of the stack to pot ratio. Now, carrying this on to the online game, 100 big blinds, which is what you start with, as it is, it's not that deep. And with all the 3-betting that goes on, the game plays effectively like a 30 or 40 big blind game, where really it doesn't matter how deep you can think and how well you can analyze, you're just not going to have that much of an edge over someone who's not an idiot or who's not tilting. And so, that's the problem with the state of the game today. And in fact, by the way, that might lead me to answer the other question where I've been lately. I have actually I've resisted doing this for quite a while, but just because I enjoyed No Limit Hold'em so much, and I've always done so well, but just seeing the shift in the game as it has finally given me the push that I needed to jump into a little bit of diversification, and I've been learning Pot Limit Omaha.
Well, that's great, because that's something that we've talked about a lot on this show lately, about how the games are a little bit softer over there. I'll probably get to maybe a couple questions. I didn't know that you had diversified in that sense, because I just want to follow up on what you were talking about. Do you find though that you've been migrating now that there's the option of playing 200 big blinds deep? What do you think about those deep tables? And I want to add a question on to that as well, because the funny thing is that in our first interview, I actually just listened to it before we were talking today, and you were talking about how a lot of times when you're playing over 300 big blinds deep, you like to keep the pot small pre-flop. You don't do a whole lot of re-raising pre-flop, but a lot of these training videos are still continuing to advocate doing a lot of re-raising, actually, the deeper that you get. So again, 2-part question there. Number one, what do you think about migrating to the 200 big blind tables? And number 2, what do you think about playing that same style as you get deeper?
Well, I would definitely love to play the 200 big blind tables, and I think that the big edges would be back if I could play that deep. But my preferred site is Pokerstars, and unless I'm mistaken, I don't believe they have 200 big blind tables. I think they're at full tilt only. Is that correct?
I'm not 100% sure. I know that they're at full tilt. That's where I mostly play. So you'd probably know more about stars than I. Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe I'm being a little bit overly cautious, but just with the, especially with the state of the economy today and stuff, I'd rather not have a lot of money spread out over different sites. So I really use only Stars now. And I know Stars does not have 200 big blind tables, but if that continues this way, I may have to look to taking at least some of my business to full tilt, if you will. So I definitely think that would be advantageous. Again, the deeper the stack, the more it favors the better player, without question. Now, in terms of re-raising, let me talk a little bit about that. If you're playing relatively shallow, 100 big blinds or less, I don't think that, between like say 80 big blinds to 250 big blinds or so, I don't think it's a good idea to do a lot of re-raising pre-flop. And the reason is simply because you want to leave yourself in a position to get money in with huge edges, or also, so basically when you play a huge pot, you've got your opponent crushed rather than, you're racing with ace king versus queens or something silly like that, so that's, and we talked about that in depth in our last interview. And also by having a deeper stack after the flop, you have more, I'm going to make up a word and call it bluffability, because there's more of your stack to threaten your opponent with, even if you don't have a hand. So I definitely think that favors the better player. Now, but if we continue on and talk about playing extremely deep, say 350 plus big blinds, now some of the things that some of the other top pros that advocate things differently than I do, now they start coming into play again, because if you now re-raise frequently pre-flop, it's not you still have plenty of stack depth behind even after the pre-flop re-raise. And if you keep your re-raises balanced such that you're re-raising with your big hands as well as with your speculative hands, now you could re-raise and then put a lot of money in after the flop, having hit some kind of quirky hand, and that there is some value in that. But it's now personally, I think that I would, my own style is to keep the pots small and then choose how big of a pot to play after the flop, because again, that enables more maneuverability, more creativity, and also makes it more possible for your opponents to make catastrophic mistakes, which, presumably I wouldn't make myself. But that being said, I can understand that it's a difference in style, and that there is some merit to frequently re-raising when you're playing exceptionally deep. But that would have to be at least 350 big blinds, because other than that, if you're playing 300 big blinds, 250 big blinds, and you re-raise a lot pre-flop, well, your opponent's never making a big mistake to get it all in with a draw or with a top pair, top kicker kind of hand. And so basically, money keeps going all in sort of a gambling way where you're racing, and in doing that, your edge is greatly reduced. So
even at 250 big blinds deep,
well,
even at that deep?
I mean, I suppose not so much. 250 maybe even is deep. Is deep enough. I mean, maybe that it's hard for me to say to give you a number that's the cutoff, because
right.
Really it's like a gradual thing, right? If it's at 100 big blinds, it's definitely not good. At 80 big blinds, it's definitely not good. And at 500 big blinds, it definitely is a way that you can play, that even that would not necessarily be a mistake as long as you're balancing properly. Now, it shifts. You know what I mean? It's sort of like a gray area how it sort of shifts. Now, it maybe at 250 it's okay, but there's so many factors. How your opponents are playing, and how it's you're kind of putting me up against the wall to say, well, is 250 okay? I mean, it's in the neighborhood of where it starts shifting
right.
to be okay.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. There's no absolute definite answer. I understand that. I want to move on to a question that comes from one of our forum goers. His name, Gorvin Coffin, asks kind of an interesting question. This is something that we did not touch on Neiman in the first interview at all. And he says that I understand that Neiman uses very small raises pre-flop, less than 3 big blinds. Could you go into the rationale for this? Also, what do you think of the current trend for opening with a min raise on the button? And does he think it's a good idea to alter his opening raise sizes in different positions and according to stack sizes?
That's a very good question. I guess there's a lot of parts to it. I guess, okay, I'll try to deal with it, one by one. The first thing that was it Gorvin? Did I get the name right?
Yeah, Gorvin.
Yeah, the first thing that Gorvin asked was why I open raise to pretty small. The reason is it kind of falls in keeping with what we've been talking about so far. I like to play a lot of pots. I play a lot of speculative hands. I'm a pretty loose player. But at the same time, in order to play that style successfully, I have to, one of my best skills in poker is knowing how big of pot sizes to play. I know when to pot control. I won't let a pot grow out of control when I've got, like a top pair type of hand. It'll be the size of the pot that I'll play will be commensurate with the strength of my hand. And since I have that as a skill set, it behooves me, I think, to start out keeping the pots small and let myself dictate how big they should be afterwards. Also, since I play so loosely and play a lot of pots, I think, again, it benefits me to come in for smaller raises because really I don't, when people play with me pre-flop, it's pretty often that I'm not going to have the best hand in terms of like a showdown hand. You know what I mean? I'm going to be raising my 6-4 suiteds and my 8-5 suiteds and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So by making those small raises, I manage the size of the pot and then play from there. Now, moving on to his question about what was the next thing he asked about the
min raise on the button.
Min raise on the button, right? Well, here's the thing. I don't necessarily think min raising is very good. The reason for that is because of something that's not actually done by players. And the reason is this. Supposing you're in the big blind and you're just facing a button open min raise, you're getting the correct odds really if you can play reasonably well and after the flop, you're getting the right odds to call with almost any two. You're getting what is it? Better than 2-1, a lot better than 2-1. Way better than 2-1. What I'm saying, okay, you're getting better than 4-1, right?
Right.
To make that call on the big blind. So there's really, and obviously, no hand is a 4-1 more than a 4-1 favorite than any other hand. Aces against 7-2 offsuit is probably somewhere in that range. I don't have the exact percentages off the top of my head, but so basically, you're giving your opponents by min raising. You're giving your opponents the right to defend correctly with whatever they may have. So because of that, I don't necessarily think it's a good idea. However, most opponents don't do this. It's like, a very small but not insignificant technical mistake that I see from so many people. Like, for instance, if 6 people have limped in a game and you're sitting in the small blind, and, as long as you don't think that the big blind is likely to raise, it makes no sense not to complete there. The pot odds are way too good for you to be folding any 2 cards, in that spot. Similarly, when someone min raises, unless you're very uncomfortable playing against them, it really, and even if you are really for that matter, it's just for the odds to flop a monster with whatever 2 cards you have, it's usually correct to defend. So because of that, technically, I don't think it's a good idea to open for a min raise, but that's sort of alleviated by the caveat that people don't defend. And so if you're against a bunch of, if you're playing against players who are going to fold with the same frequency against a min raise as they would against a 3 times raise, then yeah, by all means, you should min raise from the button. So that's my answer to that. It's not a good play if your opponents play correctly in response to it. But if they don't, not only is it a good play, but it actually sort of exploits their weaknesses. Let me give you a good example of this, like a way to exploit opponents that don't play well. Let's take a look at we have those short stacks that come into the games and they buy in for like a fifth of a stack or something, right? Or 20 blinds or whatever. A lot of those players, they can't stand to play a flop, so they're either all in against a raise or they fold pre-flop. There's no other option with them, right? So if you're in the small blind and it folds to you and they're in the big blind, and your opponent will never do anything other than push or fold, you absolutely must min-raise every hand you have. It doesn't make sense not to. Right?
Just because...
Well, because they're going to respond by folding all of the hands that they're not going to play for their stack with. So if you don't open like that, you're losing out on a ton of value of stealing their blinds. And moreover, you're saving money by making a minimum raise for the times that they do push it all in, because they're not, that's their only other play. So then, and meanwhile, if you do have a hand that you're willing to play for their stack with, they're going to respond in kind anyway. So if you have a player that is pushing or folding them, against an open raise, it's a pretty big mistake not to min raise every time it comes to you. Okay.
Now I want to follow up on the min raise on the button and just the discussion of about immediate odds versus implied odds or future odds and what can be, reverse implied odds. There was discussion, I believe, on the Poker Road forums over in the Red Strategy, the Pro forums, and this was I believe that Barry Greenstein posted this up, where people tend to use math and poker incorrectly, where they don't realize that, you might be getting 3.5 to 1 in immediate odds against a min raise on the button. But now, specifically talking actually about limit, it's even worse in no limit or pot limit. But let's say limit, for example, now you're at a positional disadvantage where on each future street, you are only getting 1 to 1 for each bet. In no limit, it's even worse because the bet sizing can be obviously larger. It can be unlimited. So even though you're getting 3.5 to 1 in immediate odds, does the positional disadvantage and the reverse implied odds dictate that you don't defend with any two in that situation?
Yeah, that's I kind of glossed over that point, and you're exactly right on that. However, that's why I included, when I said as long as you can play reasonably well, because you could, if someone min raises and you're getting 4 to 1 odds to defend, then I know the 4 to 1 is not exactly right, but we're in the ballpark there. You should be. If you can play well after the flop and kind of be able to figure out if you're dominated and get away and so on, then of course. But even if you cannot, even if you're still usually getting the right odds just to flop a monster, trips or 2 pair or some kind of something that you can definitely continue with. And right, now on the other hand, if you're sitting there with ace 4 offsuit, and you're the kind of player who, normally you'd fold that, but it's only a min raise, so you complete that. But now you're going to pay off 3 big bets when an ace hits against a pre-flop raiser. Well, then maybe if you don't have the discipline or the understanding to sort of get away from your second best hands, then you shouldn't defend them. I guess that's what it comes down to, is that in order to play poker well, you can't, past a certain level. You can't approach things formulaically. You have to be able to understand. You have to be able to gather all the factors that you can and understand when things are basically it's a decision making game that no one can give you a formula for a decision, because the more advanced you get, the more factors you have to consider. The flow of the game, your opponents, their tendencies, etc. And in terms of some players, if they play very tightly, they generally don't have to make a lot of tricky decisions, especially in the shallower games. And for those players who are not comfortable making the thinner decisions and sort of maneuvering around, then maybe it's not, it's not best to defend because they put themselves in a position to make a mistake. But that's what poker is all about, is to, if you want to improve your game, you have to put yourself in positions to make decisions. You can't just play aces and kings and ace king, and then if you hit your ace king, then you go with it. You know what I mean? There's a lot more to poker than that. And if you want to play that way, you can certainly win up to a certain level, whatever level that is, but you're not going to get a lot better. And I presume the people that are going to be listening to your show, Bart, are going to be players that are advanced or want to become advanced players and stuff. And for those players, I would say you can always continue to improve your decision-making process. And the risk of taking dominated hands, against your opponent has got to be tempered by your ability to handle that situation and to be able to get away from a second best hand, if that is, if you can decipher that it's a second best hand. I mean, and now getting back to this min raise from the button thing, I mean, even if you're playing complete rags, 7 deuce, and someone min raises, you still have the odds to call just to hit, trips, as long as you're going to get something, like maybe one more bet after the flop. And that's why I think that, even if you're willing, and I'm not advocating this, but even if you're not comfortable with your own play after the flop, even if you defend against a min raise simply to hit a monster, 2 pair or better on the flop, you're still getting the right odds against a min raise. So even if you're going to call with any 2 and check fold unless you hit a monster, you're still getting the right odds, which is why, looking at it from the other angle, I don't think min raising is quite a good idea. But again, if you have the players that are going to be folding to them, with the same frequency as they're going to be folding to a 3 times raise, well, then by all means, you should be min raising.
Which is interesting, too, because it confused me at first, but I get it now. I just want to clarify to some of the listeners out there, because if a guy were to min raise and you were getting 3.5 to 1 in immediate odds, and in whatever you flopped, he auto c-bet 80% of the pot, then you're actually calling, let's say in a 5-10 game, he makes it 20. You're calling $10 to win 35 immediately, and say he automatically, bets 25 anyways, you're calling to, $10 to basically almost get like 6 or 7 to 1 immediately anyways, right? If the guy does auto c-bet.
That's exactly right. And
is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's why, and that's why I think that it behooves us to defend more liberally when people aren't raising our blinds enough. I mean, when I say enough, I mean by a large enough ratio.
Right. Neiman, we're going to take a quick little commercial break, and we will be back right here with Samoleus Punkity right here on Cash Plays.
Cash Plays. Previously on All Strategy with Negreanu, Bonomo, and Huff.
Totally, I think that one of the first things you got to even do is forget about hand strength before the flop as being the be-all, end-all. In the book that I wrote, I mentioned how starting hand guidelines are way more important in tournaments where you are on a limited bankroll and the stacks are short. But when you're playing really, really deep, it's so much more related to the actual situation, who you're up against, your position, you throwing a wrench, doing all this type of thing. Sometimes your hand value is completely irrelevant to the situation, where you're simply playing on the button because you know the 2 players in the blinds are so tight and so weak that you can just pick up the pot with a raise. So as long as you're able to understand post-flop, you don't go broke with the hand, you shouldn't be so obsessed and worried with like, oh my goodness, is Queen 10 off the hand that I can play, or Queen 9? That's so much less relevant. And if you see all the best players in the world in tournaments, let's use Gus Hanson for an example for a second here. Wow. Did this man never meet a hand he didn't like?
All Strategy. Listen and learn. Cash Plays.
Welcome back, everyone to Cash Plays. I am here with Samoleus, Neiman Kencray. We've talked pretty heavy strategy so far in the first segment of the show. I kind of want to get into a psychological question, Neiman, that was asked by another poster on the Poker Roads forums. Came from Dixon Yass. He says, Neiman, what do you believe are the most important psychological aspects of being a professional poker player? And what do you and what do you do to keep yourself in an A-game state mentality and emotionally ready while playing? Are there any tricks?
That's a really good question, and that's actually the downfall of a lot of poker players that have a lot of talent, because inevitably you're gonna go on your downswings. You're gonna have your tough losses. You're gonna have your tough swings, and you see a lot of players with a lot of talent that try to enter the world, to make poker their vocation or their primary thing, and they do well for a while, but then they just can't. They can't withstand, and they go down the tubes, and it's very, very important to be able to handle your emotions correctly, and by that I don't just mean not getting mad. I get frustrated just like anybody else, possibly more than others. And in fact it's kind of ironic too, because the thing that frustrates me the most is the thing that I should be kind of happy about is when players play badly. I very rarely get upset when I take a cooler or take a bad beat in a situation that made a lot of sense. But if one of my opponents plays very poorly and makes a stupid decision and then gets lucky, then it gets irritating. And now, if that happens over and over, and you get online, as a lot of players multi-table, as I do. If you're playing 6 to 8 tables, and you could take 4 or 5 or 6 or 10, really bad beats in a very short period of time. And it's very important to maintain your composure there. And I think what happens a lot is that, aside from everybody knows you can't go on, wild tilt. If you start doing that, you're going to lose money in massive chunks. And I think most people already know that. But there's sort of a second layer of tilt that's sort of subtle, and we don't really realize we're doing it sometimes until we end our session, or even some of us, we don't even realize that for a lot longer than that. And what that is you get down, right? You start your session, you're down 3 or 4 buy-ins maybe from a couple of tough beats, and you're playing 6 tables or something, and you get a little bit chasey and a little bit looser, and you're not quite as disciplined. Now you're not in full-blown tilt where you're open jamming or anything like that. So, but the problem with that is you're not quite aware that you're doing it yourself. You know what I mean? Like, say you open with a hand that you wouldn't normally open. Let's just say
7-3 suited.
Okay, sure. Okay, so let's say you open with 7-3 suited, right? And then you get re-raised, and now of course normally you'd be dumping this, but you're like, God, maybe I can catch a flop, and you call the re-raise, and now the flop comes down, and it's King 7-2 rainbow, and now your opponent bets, and you're like, well, I got a piece, and maybe he's got ace queen and he's continuation betting. Let me just call here and see what he does on the turn. But surely I'll fold on the turn if I don't improve. And so then you call, and then the turn brings you a flush draw, and your opponent bets again, and now you're like, well, now he'll never know if I hit my flush, so now I certainly am getting, I should call again. I call again, and then the river bricks, and he bets again, and now you're like, well, now I can't win, but I've played this hand, like a set, so maybe I can re-raise all in, and surely he'll have to fold a big hand, and you do that, and then you've lost another 2 buy-ins that way, and it's like this kind of sort of undisciplined chasing mentality that can turn small losses or medium-sized bad sessions into massive ones. And when it gets really dangerous is when it starts spilling over from one session to the next, and over multiple days and so on, where you do this and your game goes to pot, and so then you try to you're upset, you go to bed, and the next day you decide, okay, I'm going to play better today, but you're not as equipped because you're already kind of unhappy about the day before, and you're already in this makeup mode and things like that, and so then you it happens over 2 or 3 sessions, and now all of a sudden you're down 30 buy-ins, at 100 big blinds or something. So it's and then it actually starts affecting your confidence, and that's just a dangerous spiral to be against. I actually I had a hand, a situation I was discussing with a student of mine, and it was a situation where he had been in a real funk. But you if you play well, you'll play yourself out of those funks. But it had affected his game, and I was analyzing a hand with him, and he had re-raised pre-flop with a hand that he normally would and should have called with. And I was asking him, why did you do that? You're not, you shouldn't be re-raising with a hand like that in this situation. And he says, yeah, I know, but I've been running so badly, and I've lost so much that I just didn't feel comfortable. Like I just didn't feel like calling. Now, the reason I bring up this example is that's a really good example of a real danger. Is that if you have a bad stretch, however long that is, and that affects you to the point where you're actually consciously playing hands and situations differently than what you know or what you believe to be the best play, simply because, quote unquote, that's not working for you. Now you're starting down a very slippery slope. And
let me ask you a question regarding that. If a guy, do you think it's fundamentally incorrect then if somebody is running bad to start to play a less variant style so that they can at least show some profit to build confidence back up?
No, I wouldn't. I definitely would not disagree with that. I think that also if you play a high variant style, especially if you're loose and aggressive and stuff like that, it's easier for your game to get out of kilter, because you're applying so much pressure and you're also making so many marginal decisions that if your game goes a little awry and you start doing something a little bit wrong, it doesn't take much to turn you from a big winner into a big loser. So when that happens and you can't consciously figure out exactly what you're doing wrong, I think it's a very good idea, in fact, to just batten down the hatches and start playing tight, and just cleanse your mind and start playing tight until you sort of gather the flow, start gaining confidence, start winning a session here and there, and then just start picking up some steam. So I think that's definitely a good idea. I think maybe what I was saying earlier was sort of misunderstood. What I'm saying is that, okay, let me give you an example. Let's say that you've come to the determination, which I would agree with, that in most cases, if you flop like a pair and a flush draw, it's good to play those really hard. Because of your combined hand making equity and fold equity and balance issues and so on. Now, so look, you've been doing that and you've been successful, but now you hit a bad stretch, and you have 3 or 4 such situations where you flop a pair and a flush draw, you get it all in with your opponent. 2 times he's got an overpair or a set, you don't improve, you lose. 2 times he has the higher flush draw, he hits it, you lose, and all of a sudden, you've lost a lot of money with that. Now, what would be a mistake to do is to say, well, this isn't working for me, so when I flop a pair and a flush draw, I'm just gonna call or just fold. You know what I mean? You don't want to deviate what you decipher to be the best plays because of results. That sounds obvious, but when you're in the psychological, when you're frayed, your confidence is frayed, and you're not running well and you're not playing well, and you can't quite figure out how. It's very easy to do that. It's very easy to think if you change the way you're going to play certain situations and certain hands, things will turn around for you. Note that that's very different from changing your style and just buckling down and playing tight. That's different, and I actually highly recommend that for when you're not running well, when you're not playing well. I think it's a good way to sort of hit the reset button, if you will. And also this also is another psychological point. This is also easier said than done sometimes, but it's really important to think of yourself, try not to play catch up either in a session or in a week or in a month, or try to hit a goal of making this much money, because what happens is that you play suboptimally if you're not playing each hand or each session independently of the others. You know what I mean? Like if you feel like, okay, I'm down 4,000, I got to make up 4,000 before I quit, you're going to play differently and you're going to play not as well. So it's I have my own thing. When I play online or live for that matter, I never play if I don't have at least a few hours to play, because if I play for less than 2 hours at a time, I find myself rushing to try to make money. You know what I mean? Like I try to pack in a winning session within a short period of time, but that's not, obviously I start playing my hands artificially, not in the natural flow of the game and stuff. Now that's my own thing. I'm sure there's similar things for everybody out there. You have to figure out where your own psychological weaknesses are and either correct them or stay away from them.
So you don't really have that much of a problem with again, like you said, hitting the reset button, tightening up a little bit. You might give up a tiny bit, maybe in a little bit of value, where if you were on like an up streak, you might 3-bet this guy with air in some cases, but now you're going to tone it down just because overall, and again, I'm trying to kind of paraphrase what you're saying, overall it's kind of better for your game. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I can expand on that actually. You're not, because you got to be careful also not to go into a shell and start playing sort of scared where people will take advantage of you. You would deviate from the way that you would play when you're playing your A game, but not because, and so in a sense you could say that, yeah, okay, you're giving up a little bit of an edge, but it's because you're actually not making those decisions optimally. Like for instance, let's take the example you just gave me. Let's say that in this particular situation, you would have 3-bet this guy with air if you're playing well and things are going real, and now this time you choose not to. Well, the reason you choose not to this second time around is because you don't necessarily have the confidence in yourself that you're choosing the right spot to make that 3-bet with air. Because maybe you're frustrated and you've been 3-betting more. Maybe your image isn't really good and, you've been caught bluffing a couple times and you know what I mean? And this really isn't a good spot. Or maybe you're just not having your best day, or you're in a funk or in a downswing and you don't have the ability to select those spots as fluidly and as in the rhythm and flow of the game as you normally would when you're playing your A game. So if that's the case, then it's by all means you're not giving up an edge by not taking those spots. You're actually playing to your highest potential of your current state of mind in that potential. I mean, it's just like just to give kind of a loose analogy. Let's say you got a baseball player who's like a real great base stealer, right? And he's on first base, and 90% of the time he's gonna go and steal second base. Well, if he's now just coming back from a hamstring injury and he's standing on first base, chances are he's not going to go just because he doesn't want to re-aggravate it, or he doesn't have the confidence in his explosion or his burst or whatever. Now, does that mean he's actually giving up something? Well, maybe. In a sense, but really, he's just simply making a concession to the fact that his base stealing ability isn't as good as it normally is when he's on his A game. You know what I mean? And it's sort of the same kind of thing. You're giving up some of those, the things that are on the cutting edge simply because you're not currently, maybe because you're in a downswing, maybe because you're distracted, or maybe just you've generally had some stuff happen to fray your confidence. You're not in a situation to make the same cutting edge plays that you would when you're in your A+ game, but that's okay. You can give those up with the expectation that you're going to get back in your groove and get those back.
I think that's a great analogy. I know that you're from Belmont, Massachusetts. I wondered if Coco Crisp yesterday in Game 7 of the World Series thought that he had lost his explosion when he missed second base. I don't know if you're a Red Sox fan, but those out there.
I watched that, and
Yeah.
Good to see. I do live in Boston, but I actually grew up in New York, so I'm actually a Yankees fan. So that was.
Oh no, Neiman. Oh man. Hey, I have one last thing to ask you before we are going to go away this week, but we're going to hear more from you, I believe, next week. And this, or I have one or two more things. This question comes from a poster again called The Duke on Cash Plays forums. And basically, Neiman, what he asks and what I want you to do is, can you basically break down your thought process when you are playing a hand? And I'm not talking about, I'm not giving you a specific hand, but what are the ultimate goals when you are determining bet sizing and determining your actions from street to street?
Wow, that's such a broad question.
I mean, I'll try to help you out, like in the sense of kind of where I'm trying to go with this. Are you trying to basically make the best play against your opponent's, what you perceive your opponent's range to be in your equity against that range?
Yeah, and well, there's more to it there, right? It's against your opponent's range, against his perception of your range, and basically you're ultimately always making what the play. You should always be making the play that has the highest expectation, and what you have to assimilate all the various factors that come into play to determine what is your expectation, and those factors include your opponent's range and his tendencies, his perception of you, the board texture, your hand, your percentage of making your hand if you're on the come. If you think your opponent's on the draw, you're pricing him out or setting a trap. I mean, it's such a broad question that it's very difficult for me to sort of answer, because there's every hand, every situation is different. But what it boils down to, if you want me to answer in like a one quick sentence, is at any given time and any decision you make, the decision should be based on what action, what play has the highest expected value. I don't know if that's really the answer that you're looking for, but
I think it's a pretty simple answer for a broad question.
Yeah, I think the question is really it's an important question. It's a good question, but it's too broad to really answer in too much more detail than that.
Right. I'm going to touch on this further in the next episode, because we're going to ask you some more stuff in the next week, which we're going to record actually immediately after this. But for those of them, kind of give you a plug, and again, we'll go into this more. For those that are interested in doing some coaching with you, or because you do coach privately, is there a way? Because I actually got several emails from people wanting to know how they go about getting involved with you and your students. I do have all the students that I can take at the moment, but I would certainly be open and interested to doing another group, and I can certainly put anybody that wants to be on my wants to be on my wait list for private lessons. They can certainly email me and I'll put them on the wait list. I can't necessarily promise how soon that I'll be able to fit them in, because it's very I have a moderately long wait list, but then again, some of the people have been on the wait list for a while, so when their spot's up and I call them, they're no longer available or interested. So it's possible that if you got on my lesson wait list, you could get in fairly quickly, or it could take a very long time. It's very hard for me to say, because it's also some of my students that are currently with me have been with me for a long time, more than a year, and others, turn over very quickly. It's unfortunately, I'm not really able to give a great estimate as to how quickly I can get to you in terms of private lessons. However, I did have a lot of success, and really enjoyed doing
a group forum lesson for a while, and I would certainly, if I had enough interest, from your readers and others, I would certainly revisit the idea of doing that again. My answer, how they would to get in touch with me is you could give out my email, Bart, if you have that.
Sure, you can say it out loud right now if you're comfortable with that.
Sure.
Go ahead.
It's Neiman Kenkre at yahoo.com. That's my.
And how do you spell that? Niman, right? Yep. Kenkre.
That's right. At Yahoo, okay. and maybe just throw in your subject line saying that you're interested in some lessons. What I'd like to hear from you is for your listeners out there that they would be following up on this. I'd like to hear the about what limits you play and what your strengths and weaknesses maybe are, and what you would be looking for in a coach, and if you were interested in private or group lessons or both. If like I said, I've got a reasonably sized wait list for private lessons, more than happy to add anyone to that. But right now I'm not doing any group lessons, so if there is enough interest, I can certainly start that up again. In the group lessons, what I've done in the past is I've had a group of anywhere from 4 to 7 students or so. And obviously the lessons are more economical. I charge about half my rate of my private lessons. And we just have a group forum discussion in which, we get on instant messenger or the like and just talk about, do some hand analysis or talk about concepts. And then we will sometimes do sweat sessions where we watch one member of the group play while the rest of us analyze and things like that. And it worked out very successfully. I think the people in my first couple of groups were quite happy with it. So that's certainly something that I would revisit if I had enough interest.
Well, that's going to wrap things up for this week. We will be back with a kind of a part 2 from this Samoleus 2 series of cash plays. So stick around. We will see you next week.